This lecture continues to look at Japan with the Heian culture at court, followed by the samurai culture that will take it over with the Kamakura period. The Heian period, which lasted between 794 and 1185, will develop a very sophisticated secular culture at court in Kyoto, where the emperor is located. Here, men and women are expected to be well versed in several art forms. Women, for instance, had to be adept at arranging 12 layers of colored robes, while men would identify varieties of burning incense. Court life here will have the poetic expression of love as its primary theme, with women central to prose and poetry. Men and women were expected to write in poetry in Japanese kana script developed at this time. The kana script and the Japanese language in general is taken from the more complex Chinese vocabulary and writing system, and then is going to be simplified for the katakana. The Japanese, in fact, use the Chinese language as their international language of scholarship, just as the Catholic Church did in the West with Latin. They simplified the Chinese alphabet to develop their own in the 9th century, the katakana seen here. Again, still written top to bottom and read left to right. Often they would use these to decorate hand scrolls or folding albums, and were appreciated in private settings like the landscape paintings on hand scrolls we've been looking at previously. This new interest in secular art and the aristocracy, combined with the kana script, can be seen in the work of Lady Murasaki for the Tale of the Genji from the 11th century. Now, Lady Murasaki was a lady-in-waiting who wrote on the lifestyle of Heian aristocrats at court. The fiction is going to be produced here for the amusement of fellow court ladies and represents the world's first novel. The story that Lady Murasaki is going to write is of love affairs between Prince Genji and his companions. The theme that is going to be carried throughout the tale is the conception of fleeting pleasures, which is considered to be the ultimate sadness in life. Anything that we desire is but fleeting and momentary. Therefore, we have this Buddhist view of the vanity of earthly pleasures carried out. We should not try to hold on to the pleasures of life here, and instead focus on moving beyond them. One of the earliest secular paintings from Japan can be seen here, illustrating one of the episodes from the Tale of the Genji by Lady Murasaki, this one specifically from the Kashiwagi chapter. It is going to be illustrating the Yamato-e, or the new native style to Japan. Yamato taking from the old Japanese word for Japan. Yamato-e being the style that is specifically Japanese, like Silak was for the Koreans. We have here a bird's eye perspective with a blown away roof, so we can see the figures inside of the structure. And the composition and arrangement of these figures communicates the narratives, not their expressions or gestures. This hand scroll is going to be alternating between these series of texts and the illustrations from the story as well, much like graphic novels would today. These very delicate lines and strong mineral colors are going to then be set within asymmetrical compositions. The court figures are set within these architectural settings with screens dividing them, and they help to convey the mood with various props such as plants and partitions. This is not going to be a new subject, for images of women at court engaged in various duties go back to the 5th century, and is going to be revived as we discussed in the Tang Dynasty. The Ming also have a great interest in the activities at court, but they generally are going to showcase beautiful courtly women that are engaged in playing musical instruments or dancing, instead of a fiction or a narrative associated with their lives and scandals that they got into. We do not show the emotions of these figures on their faces. The feelings instead are conveyed through the colors, poses, and the fluttering of curtains. Thus, the overall composition tells us how we should feel about the narrative and how the figures within it are feeling at this time and reacting to these situations. The story shown here is the episode where Prince Genji is holding his newborn baby boy from his wife Nyosan. The scandal is that the father of the child is not Genji himself, but instead another noble at court. Now, we find that Genji was himself unfaithful and a philanderer, therefore he cannot complain of his wife's infidelity. Furthermore, we can see the figures not by way of their faces, but the cramped and asymmetrical way in which they are cropped. The mother can be seen with the edge of her clothing in the upper left-hand corner, whereas the true father of the child is now dead, and Genji himself is an illegitimate son of an emperor. Thus we see the irony and sorrow of this situation. There is a court lady under 12 layers of robes. Remember that court ladies need to differentiate and be able to dress themselves in these very immaculate layers. We also have another court lady with long flowing hair next to them, almost acting as midwives in the situation. So the humans are going to be quite small by scale in this scene, which is dominated by a wall and curtains. They are in fact squeezed into a corner. So we have this type of psychological compression happening, showing how they are forced into these situations and allow us to realize the sad irony, which of course would also be a Buddhist understanding of holding on to these vain, prideful understandings such as fathering one's own child or caring that your wife was unfaithful. The composition here, and not the expressions or the bodily posture, is what is conveying emotions in which these various figures at court are going to be forced into this situation. The text portion of the Tale of Genji is going to be on a hand scroll written in kana script and is also used to write poetry in Japanese. The waka, or the native poetry tradition, has 31 syllables in its format. The most popular of these are gathered together in bound albums, and the most famous of these being the 36 Immortal Poets, which is an anthology. So here we have one of the pages of this anthology of the Ishiyama Temple, this one taken from the title of the temple in which it was housed. It's going to survive, but only in individual sections and fragments. So these separated volumes, called Ishiyama Gire, taken from the title of the temple they were kept in, show us the tradition and aesthetic of the Japanese, which is both, again, florid and natural at the same time. Much like Western carpet pages or the decorations on Qurans and on various Gospels, we have the same type of interest in non-representational or non-objective forms. We have simple flowing letters here that are interspersed with more complex ones, such as Chinese characters. The distinctive asymmetry is going to be popular, making its way from China through Korea, as we discussed, in the love of asymmetry, to Japan. The poem seems to float on top of this dyed paper that is decorated with block printing. Particles of gold and silver are pressed into the paper as well, giving us a shimmering effect to this multicolored scene. There are two verses by the courtier Kenotaraki here, and the verses read, "Until yesterday I could meet her, but today she is gone. Like clouds over the mountain, she has wafted away." Thus we have suggestions of natural imagery that are going to come from the reading, thus making you think of the subject so popular at Heian court, which is women, and the association with them and natural formations, which, remember, the mountains, beautiful waterfalls, and other structures are where these kami came from in the Shinto religion. Therefore, we must think of reading these types of poems interspersed with these hand scrolls and images for court functions where we would read them in an intimate setting. Here we have the different sections to where they would be read from right to left with these very quick, suggestive calligraphic strokes. The figures then would complement the melancholic nature of the ideas associated with love lost and with scandal at court. Another tradition that existed at the same time as this Heian courtly style will be the one practiced and seen here by Toba Sojo, attributed to him, which is a scene of frolicking animals from the 12th century. Here we're going to show satire at court and satirizing behavior in the Japanese culture by way of animals. Here we have another style of the Yamato-e, which is going to be shown through these bold, confident strokes like the calligraphic style. It, however, is monochromatic. We have very little color in this particular approach, and the subjects are going to be outside of court, not of courtly officials. The minimalist style is actually taken from the literati, from the Chinese version, say, of Nizan in the Rongxi studio, however, now used for humorous satirical purposes. In it, we satirize human behavior through animal antics, and we find that this is going to be attributed to an abbot of a Buddhist monastery. Therefore, there is satire associated with Buddhism and the hypocrisy that lies within those that are insensitive or insincere when it comes to their religion. The monkey seen here is robed as a monk and chants incantations that come out of his mouth like wisps of smoke. He offers a peach branch on this altar. Next to him, we find a frog is seated on a lotus leaf in a Buddha-like pose, reminiscent of the Amitabha Buddha with the flame-like halo behind him that we have seen in Japanese custom. Behind the two, we see rabbits, monkeys, and foxes, as well as a frog, all dressed in monastic and or representing secular worshippers. Some of them, like the monkey, is quite bored and distracted. We do not know exactly what the meaning is here, but we are certain that it satirizes humans through animals, which is universal across cultures. As we discussed in the ancient Near East, going back to Sumeria, the first culture to develop cuneiform writing, we have the same understanding with animals behaving like humans, right, on the sound box to the bull-headed lyre. We know that in the Middle Ages as well, Aesop's fables or bestiaries are going to have animals acting like people. In late medieval marginalia as well, we find that humor is going to be employed with animals engaging in human behaviors, affirming the status quo of what the appropriate roles are. We find in several examples, we have animals that are going to be engaged in mock combat, like these rabbits and toads here. Or rabbits are going to be practicing archery in the same way. The Kamakura period, which lasted between 1185 and 1333, will find the establishment of the shogunate, because courtiers at the Heian court are going to be too engrossed in their own refinement, and they neglect to actually govern the country. So we have the head of the Minamoto clan, Yoritomo, who is going to live from 1147 to 99. He defeats the Taira family and orders the emperor to appoint him shogun, or general-in-chief, in charge of the armed forces. So the military capital of Japan then moves to Kamakura, off to the east, near modern-day Tokyo. The emperor remains in Kyoto. So the political and military power is now with the shogun and establishes the shogunate, which is in existence until 1868. The images in the hand scrolls painted from this period are now going to focus on the life of the samurai. Here we see battles for domination between various clans being the primary subject, like the night attack on Sanjo Palace. In 1160, we find that 500 Minamoto rebels are going to stage a daring raid on Sanjo Palace. The surprise attack takes place in the middle of the night, where they abduct the emperor. These battles were primarily fought by mounted and armored warriors. Bows and arrows and swords would be used, though practicing archery on horseback was the primary way in which these samurai would attack, charging at full gallop, then loosing arrows before wheeling away quickly, much like Arabs and Mongols, who practiced the same type of hit-and-run strategy. The sword of the samurai, famous for its shape and design, is the katana. The katana was worn at the waist and was long and curved, thus for slashing. The sharpness of the katana was very difficult to master with metallurgy, and certainly could not have been achieved through the use of bronze. Instead, steel is used here. The difficulty, though, in forging a samurai sword or katana is that steel, which is hard enough to actually hold a razor-sharp edge, is quite brittle, in fact. It breaks very easily. But still, that's resilient enough to withstand rough use is too soft and will not hold an edge. It will be dull. So we find that these sword-making masters and forgers are going to come up with a solution. They wrap a forged blade with a hard cutting edge, and the inside of which is going to be softer, supporting it. The armor with which samurai are going to be clad is going to be known as yoroi, for it is designed for warriors on horseback, with overlapping iron and lacquered leather scales that are punched with holes and laced together with leather thongs. They are brightly colored with silk braids, depending upon which master they are serving. The upper legs are going to be defended with four-sided skirts attached to the armor, whereas the arms have two large rectangular panels tied together with cords. The head is protected by way of a helmet with iron plates riveted together that would deflect arrows. Here we can see the way in which this armored warrior would have been protected. Thus we find hitting him directly with an arrow, this would be deflected. And then if he dismounted on the ground, you then could engage an opponent with a katana. Here in the imagery of the great exploits of samurai warriors, we have the sense of an eyewitness to this account, with very quick, brisk, and lively brushwork and figures. We find that the rapid brushwork is much like the earlier literati style that we just saw with Toba Sojo and his frolicking animals, thus capturing the immediacy and the violence of this attack. The bird's eye view is also going to be taken from the Genji as well as the blown off roof perspective here. The quick, wispy strokes are going to effectively communicate the destruction that's going to be wrought by the samurai on the emperor's palace, as we see flames engulfing the structure. Overall, we still have isometric projection, for the roofs do not converge at a distance, and we find that the primary concern here is going to be the violence inflicted by the samurai. This is the new world of the samurai that will dominate secular arts during this period, for they are the dominant cultural force. Alternatively to this militaristic period, we have the spreading of Pure Land Buddhism, which is the most popular religion in Japan to this day. New sects would be founded to promote its ideology that would appeal to all levels of the populace. And here we have Kosho and Kayuya preaching as an example of this type of Pure Land Buddhism. Now, Kayuya is going to be the itinerant monk who is famous for urging country folk to join in singing chants to be Buddha Amida. He then converted to Buddhism after slaying a deer, so he is shown holding a staff with deer horns. He's wearing traveling clothes and carries a small gong, so he would chant and then strike the gong. Out of his mouth, you see the actual chant with 6 small Buddhas emerging, one for each of the 6 syllables, Mu Amida Butsu. So we can see that he is chanting the phrase that will guarantee one will be reborn in the Western paradise, in the Pure Land with Buddha. This is the more immediate road to salvation that was more egalitarian, that more people could appreciate. So we find that it's going to be stating hail to Amida Buddha, and one would be reborn with him very simply, quickly, and directly in paradise. So this embodies the Pure Land chant that most people, commoners especially, would appreciate in their religion. It is going to be direct, for even one sincere invocation of the chant could lead a sinner to Western paradise in this tradition. Showing what this would look like, and Buddha responding, we see here the descent of Amida and the 25 Bodhisattvas. This painting of a hanging scroll from the Kamakura period illustrates very literally this notion of Western Pure Land Buddhism in a painting which is popular at the time called Raigo, or the welcoming approach, which is going to show Buddha approaching someone who is dying in his home. So the Amida Buddha, along with the Bodhisattvas, come down to earth from a mountain, which of course is going to be in Japanese where the kami are going to descend from as well, bringing together Buddhism and Shinto. This is a very popular image at the time in which the Amida Buddha is shown coming down to take one's soul directly from one's deathbed up to Western paradise. This is going to find that the person near death is holding on to cords and is going to hope that their soul will be escorted directly with the help of Buddha and these bodhisattvas. We see these carried by, these cords and these beads, by Buddhists today. They are very similar to the rosary that Catholics would pray to in hopes that they also would have their soul carried to heaven, just as we can see on deathbed chants in the Ars Moriendi in the Middle Ages, where people would be praying, receiving the last rites so that their soul would be spared. This is very unlike the very complex mandalas of esoteric Buddhism. It is the most straightforward and accessible promise of salvation available to the broad swath of the population in Japan. So here we have this promise that one merely needs to state these words, and Buddha can then come and take your soul up to the next realm. The first known version of this is actually going to be found in the Phoenix Hall, on the doors surrounding this massive sculpture of the Amida Buddha, which also is surrounded by various bodhisattvas and angels. The same notion that Amida Buddha will take you to Western paradise, which is what the Phoenix Hall looks like. Now the kirkane is the cut gold leaf technique that's going to be found in Buddha and the Bodhisattvas here, that has thin slivers of gold leaf that's going to allow these elaborate patterns that would shimmer in the light of oil lamps, making the scene seem spiritually magical. This brings together Shinto beliefs and Buddhist beliefs. So we have here the landscape as something that is considered divine. And so with the early kami, or the ancestral spirits coming down from the mountains, we now have that combination, literally seeing Buddha now coming down from the mountain. Therefore, we have the merging of these two faiths, with Buddhism and Shinto brought together in a type of religion that is still practiced today in Japan. Now, Zen Buddhism is quite the opposite, evolving in the later Kamakura era. Kayua represents this type of itinerant life of Pure Land Buddhism, as he's going to wander about preaching and allowing commoners to gain salvation. The opposite can be seen in Zen monks who secluded themselves in monasteries and lived a life of austerity. They would resemble the original teachings of the historical Buddha and practice them, as they would remove themselves from daily life. They were not going out and proselytizing, for instance. So here we're going to have one of these Zen masters illustrated with the school of the mind here coming from China. So this Neo-Confucianism approach is going to inspire Chan or Zen Buddhism in the late 12th century, that then makes its way to Japan, whereby one would reject the formal path to enlightenment and instead appreciate meditation to short-circuit the rational mind and lead to sudden enlightenment in this new intuitive approach. Therefore, Zen Buddhism appealed greatly to the self-disciplined spirit of samurai warriors, who were greatly dissatisfied with older forms of Buddhism connected to the court. Therefore, the last form of Buddhism to reach Japan from the mainland is Zen Buddhism. Here, one of the earliest Japanese Zen Buddhist paintings uses ink as an outline with various subtle touches of color. In it, we have a seated, meditating monk atop a rock who has an unwavering, focused stare. In it, we have the very opposite of the Pure Land Buddhist approach, which promises salvation. Instead, one must understand these very esoteric ideas and try to short-circuit the consciousness, and then have this leap of intuition, which allows you to gain this notion of nirvana. Now, with renewed contacts with China, we find that society is largely dominated by samurai warriors who have a rather pragmatic outlook. They appreciate realism in art, and the dominance of the warrior class will continue on in the next period in Japan. This will include the Muromachi and the Momoyama periods.